The man's name was Arthur, and he woke up precisely at 7, as he did every day. The morning light was a soft, gray promise filtering through the thin curtains. He swung his legs out of bed, his feet finding the familiar cool of the wooden floor. The gentle ritual of his morning began, a quiet ballet of habit. He went to the kitchen. He filled the kettle with water and set it on the stove to boil. He spooned dark coffee grounds into a press. He took 2 slices of bread and placed them in the toaster. These were small, certain actions in a world that often felt uncertain. He gathered his keys from the small dish by the door, their jingle a tiny, metallic song that meant the day was truly starting now. Once the coffee was brewed, steaming and fragrant in his favorite mug, he took his toast and walked to the living room window. He always did this, but this morning, the city was not there. It was perfect, seamless, and startling. It did not show him the world outside. It showed him a man in a slightly rumpled shirt, holding a mug of coffee and a piece of toast, looking surprised. His own face stared back at him, every line and shadow rendered in perfect, unforgiving detail. The man in the mirror was him, of course, but he looked like a stranger. He saw the tiredness etched around his eyes, a faint landscape of worries he rarely acknowledged. He noticed a small, pale scar on his left hand, a relic from a childhood fall, a story he had not thought about in years. A hesitant smile touched his lips, and the man in the mirror smiled back with the same uncertainty. Arthur reached out a hand, his fingers tracing the cool, smooth surface. It was solid. It was real. He tried the latch, but it would not budge. The window was sealed shut, a perfect silvered barrier between him and the world he expected to see. He stepped back, a strange feeling prickling his skin. It was not fear, not yet. Every portal to the outside world had been replaced. The house no longer looked out. It only looked in. Leaving his apartment felt like stepping into a dream. The building's lobby doors, usually transparent glass, were now vast, polished mirrors. The air was crisp. The sky was the same familiar shade of pale blue. But the city was utterly transformed. Every house on his street had its windows replaced with mirrors. Every apartment building did too. Every quaint little cottage had mirrored panes. The entire street was a dazzling, blinding corridor of light. A calico cat sat serenely on a windowsill. It stared intently at its own mirrored image. He passed a small corner shop where he bought his newspaper each morning. Its large front window was a mirror. Its door was a mirror. A little girl emerged, clutching a bright red lollipop. She stopped, eyes wide at herself, and touched her messy pigtails with solemn concentration.
You look lovely, my dear.
A city bus rumbled to a stop. Its entire side was a long, unbroken sheet of mirror. They saw their worn shoes, they saw their anxious expressions, they saw their hopeful smiles.
I just saw my father.
It was as if the world inside the screens was oblivious to the world outside. But the digital world was on fire. Phones and social media. Panic, dark humor, awe. Today, the city looks at us. Quieter voices drew sketches of fleeting emotions, shame, a burst of joy, a moment of profound loneliness. The city felt like a grand theater where everyone was both the actor and the audience. People moved differently, a new self-consciousness in their gestures. A woman lost in thought would catch her reflection, straighten, smooth her hair, as if remembering she was being watched. But the watcher was only herself. A group of teenagers, usually loud and boisterous, stood quietly before a mirrored wall, looking at themselves together. They saw their matching jackets, their carefully styled hair, the uncertainty in each other's eyes. A man about to shout at a cyclist stopped mid-yell. He saw his own face, red and contorted, and lowered his hand. He saw not a monster, just a tired, frustrated man. In a cafe with mirrored windows, a couple sat in silence, not looking at each other, but at their reflections, sitting side by side. The mirror showed the distance between them, the space that felt like a canyon. The woman in the reflection reached out and touched the man's hand. A moment later, the real woman did the same. A woman stood before her mirrored window, humming. She had always been told she couldn't sing, but with only herself as audience, she began to sing softly, watched her lips shape words and her throat vibrate. She saw not a failed singer, a woman who loved music. Her voice grew a little stronger, a little more confident, filling the quiet room with a melody that was all her own. The mirror did not judge, it only reflected, and in that reflection, she found a small piece of freedom. Arthur found himself drawn to the central square, the heart of the city. It was usually a place of hurried movement. Today, it was a place of stillness. The fountain's plaque, once a general's story, was now a smooth mirror. People stood as if at a shrine, gazes fixed on themselves, framed by the cascading water. A young man with a guitar began to sing, not for the crowd, but for the man in the mirror. He watched his own mouth move, tracked the passion in his face. An intimate duet with himself. Near the fountain, a woman's hand rose, palm to heart, as her mask crumbled for a moment and she breathed deep. A laughing child skidded to a stop, blew a raspberry at his reflection, and laughter echoed across the square. One by one, people made faces. Silly, goofy, exaggerated, and the heavy air lifted into shared joy. Arthur stood apart, an observer on the edge. He had seen so many faces today. People weep for who they had been, laugh at who they were. A woman find her voice, a man find his memory. The city of mirrors was showing everyone the truth, not just their appearance, but their hearts. And well, Arthur was beginning to see his own. Not all the moments born from the mirrors were sweet or joyful. The reflections were honest, and honesty can be a painful thing. A woman pressed both hands to a bakery window, her forehead resting on the cool surface. Silent tears streamed down as the ghosts of harsh words replayed in her mind's eye. In an alley, a man came face to face with himself and ran. Arthur wondered, was it the face of a coward, a liar, a man who had failed his family? The mirror did not create the truth. It only showed what was already there. For some, the truth was a monster they could not bear to face. Through a mirrored window, a family sat in tense silence. Their conversation, a painful ballet of gazes, met in the glass. But the woman at the bakery wasn't alone for long. After long, difficult words, tea was poured and hands reached out. The mirrors showed the wound and held a vision of how it might begin to close. As the day wore on, the initial shock began to recede, replaced by quiet, collective acceptance. A small group of students started a movement. They made simple signs. Look kindly. See the good within. Share a smile with yourself. People started cleaning the mirrors, not just glass, but their new reality. An artist painted frames. Someone tucked kind notes into the edges. A child found a paper heart, smiled at her reflection, and kept it like a treasure. A musician played his cello for the reflected audience of trees, sky, and his own focused expression. A famously rude man looked at his face, inhaled, and knocked. Two men began to talk. The mirrors reflected a choice, to be better, to be kinder, to connect, and across the city, people chose to connect. Arthur walked through this new gentleness, listening to the loud echoes of small gestures. As dusk settled, the city of mirrors became a city of captured light. Street lamps flickered on, their glow multiplied. Car headlights became long ribbons, neon painted the night. Walking the city at night was like walking through a forest of stars. They looked at their reflections, and the reflections of others, fellow travelers in this luminous world. Arthur walked toward his street, mindful of images. He watched his tired but peaceful face swing toward him and away. At home, the mirror was a dark, inky pool reflecting a single lamp. He sat and looked at the man in the mirror. He did not look away, did not hunt flaws or conjure regrets. He saw a man who had spent the day witnessing the quiet unfolding of the human heart, lonely yet newly connected. He rested his chin on his hand and made a small promise to the man in the glass. "I will call my brother tomorrow," he whispered into the quiet room. He wrote, "Call David," then added, "Buy roses for the woman at the bakery." He smiled, a real, genuine smile, and the glass returned it. A small, warm light began to glow inside him. The next morning, the mirrors were still there, but the city had changed. Small offerings and softer words appeared. "We see you." A little girl waved at her reflection and felt impossibly brave. Months passed, the seasons turned, the mirrors remained. People learned to live with them, to use them, to meet each other in them. Arthur called his brother. It was awkward, then warm, and soon they were laughing. He brought roses to the bakery, saw his own smile in the glass, and felt the warmth grow. Small acts became a habit, new rituals of connection. One evening, palm on the cool glass, he whispered, "Thank you."